The chamber was already buzzing before the gavel struck. Cameras whirred, flashes popped, and murmurs rippled across the room like the low hum of an oncoming storm. The hearing was meant to discuss media responsibility and political influence. But everyone in attendance knew it was about something much bigger. At the center of the commotion sat Jasmine Crockett, composed yet unflinching, eyes sharp behind her glasses. Across from her sat Sean Hannity, the Fox News host known for his confidence, his bluster, and his loyal audience. Between them, the air crackled. Crockett adjusted her microphone. "Mr. Hannity," she began, her voice calm but edged with precision. "You've repeatedly claimed on national television that investigative reporting about election interference is nothing but a hoax. Would you like to clarify whether that's your personal opinion or an editorial stance of your network?" Hannity leaned forward with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Congresswoman, my opinions are based on facts. Facts that your side conveniently ignores when they don't fit your narrative." Her eyebrow arched, just slightly. "Facts," she repeated, almost tasting the word. "Good. Let's talk about facts then." A hush fell. The audience leaned in. Crockett pressed a button and a large screen behind her flickered to life, displaying clips, segments from Hannity's own broadcasts. Each clip bore his face and voice, insisting that there was zero evidence of wrongdoing on matters that were later proven otherwise. Hannity's smile faltered, but he kept his composure. "Congresswoman, you're cherry-picking statements out of context." "No, sir," she interrupted, voice firm but controlled. "I'm contextualizing your words with the truth." There was a faint rustle of approval from the gallery. Even some members of the committee exchanged sidelong glances. Crockett clicked to the next slide, a transcript dated from a previous year, showing Hannity's own words juxtaposed against official court documents that contradicted him. "You see," she continued, "it's one thing to hold opinions. It's another to broadcast misinformation to millions and then hide behind the claim of being an entertainer instead of a journalist." Hannity's hand tightened on his pen. "Are you suggesting that my show is propaganda?" "I'm suggesting," Crockett said evenly, "that you can't play both sides of the accountability line. Either you stand by your statements as factual or you admit they're opinionated entertainment. Which is it?" The silence was deafening. Then Hannity chuckled, that familiar, dismissive laugh he used on air. "Congresswoman, it seems you don't understand how media works. We engage in debate, not indoctrination. And yet," she countered, "you've had guests promote conspiracy theories without factual verification. You've called journalists enemies of the state, and mocked public officials who tried to fact-check you. Tell me, is that debate? Or is it deliberate distortion?" The words hit their mark. Hannity's posture stiffened. He glanced toward the committee chair, perhaps seeking reprieve, but none came. This was Crockett's floor, and everyone knew it. She continued, voice steady. "Let's also talk about your network's internal memos." The chamber erupted in whispers. Hannity's head snapped up. "What memos?" Crockett slid a folder across the table. "Receipts, Mr. Hannity. Direct communications showing that producers were aware certain claims lacked verification, yet the broadcasts went on anyway." A flush crept across his face, subtle at first, then unmistakable. The color rose up his neck as his jaw clenched. "That's confidential material," he snapped. Crockett didn't flinch. "It's public record now. And it demonstrates a pattern of intentional deception under the guise of journalism." Someone coughed in the back, someone else muttered, "She got him." The committee chair banged the gavel once to restore order. But the rhythm of the moment had already changed. Hannity, who built a career on controlling the narrative, suddenly found himself defending it. He tried to pivot. "Congresswoman, your accusations are politically motivated. Let's not pretend you're a neutral observer here." Crockett leaned forward, eyes locked on his. "Neutrality is not the same as accountability, Mr. Hannity. You're in a hearing because your influence shapes public perception. If your voice reaches millions, your responsibility multiplies, not disappears." The room buzzed again. Cameras zoomed in. Every word felt like a strike of the gavel. "Tell me," she pressed on, "when you told your viewers that investigations were a witch hunt, did you read the court filings? Did you look at the indictments? Or did you just repeat what was convenient for your ratings?" Hannity's lips tightened. "I interpret events as any commentator does. My viewers can think for themselves." "Can they?" Crockett asked quietly. "If the information they're given is false, That line landed like a hammer. The murmurs swelled again. Even those behind Hannity shifted uncomfortably. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out brittle. You know, Congresswoman, I expected a fair discussion, not a courtroom drama. Then perhaps you should have come prepared for both, she said, coolly. The audience tensed. The temperature in the chamber felt higher now, or maybe that was just Hannity's rising color. Crockett closed her folder but didn't lean back. Her tone softened, but the words cut deeper. This isn't personal, Mr. Hannity. It's about the power of influence. The power to twist truth into outrage, and the cost that comes with it. He exhaled sharply. You think my show created outrage? Look around, Congresswoman. People are angry because they've been ignored, not because I told them to be. Or perhaps, she said, because they were told to be angry, at the wrong people. Another hit. The chair called for a brief recess, but nobody moved. All eyes were on Hannity, whose face was visibly red now, his composure cracking just slightly beneath the weight of her evidence. Crockett gathered her papers slowly. We'll continue after the break, she said, standing. And when we return, Mr. Hannity, we'll discuss your involvement in shaping narratives during election coverage, and the real-world harm that followed. As she turned, the cameras caught everything. Hannity's jaw tight, his eyes narrowed, his fingers drumming impatiently. The clip would go viral before the recess even ended. She walked out calm, confident, unshaken, leaving him to sit under the harsh white lights, face red and eyes burning with something between anger and disbelief. The storm had only just begun. When the recess ended, the chamber felt different. Whispers that had echoed in the hallways moments earlier now hung heavy in the air. Staffers shuffled papers nervously, journalists adjusted their cameras, and members of the committee leaned forward in anticipation. Sean Hannity sat back in his chair, jaw set, rehearsing composure. He had weathered tough interviews before. He had sparred with senators, governors, even presidents. But this was not television. This was testimony on record under oath. Then Jasmine Crockett returned, calm, centered. Her stride was measured, her gaze steady. She carried a single folder in one hand and a small notepad in the other. No entourage, no drama. Just presence. She resumed her seat, adjusted her microphone and spoke softly. We're back in session. Mr. Hannity, before the recess, I presented internal communications from your network suggesting that knowingly false information was broadcast to the public. You objected, saying it was confidential. Would you like to clarify that objection? Hannity cleared his throat. I'm saying those documents were part of private discussions between producers and hosts, never meant for political interpretation. You're taking them out of context. Crockett nodded once. Context is exactly what I'm interested in. She opened her folder and lifted the first sheet. Exhibit B, an email exchange dated January 12, 2021. Your producer writes, and I quote, "We know this claim isn't true, but the audience expects it. If we backtrack now, we'll lose half our base. Does that sound familiar?" A ripple of reaction moved through the room. Hannity didn't answer immediately. His fingers tapped the table. Congresswoman, I can't verify every email someone attributes to me or my team. Networks have thousands of communications daily. She cut in smoothly. This one bears your CC. The audience collectively inhaled. The sound of a pen dropping from someone's hand echoed like thunder in the stillness. Hannity blinked. That doesn't mean I approved it. Crockett leaned forward. But you didn't deny it, either. Her tone was razor sharp, polite, but merciless. Let's move on. You testified earlier that your commentary is based on facts. So tell me, when those facts are contradicted by your own internal memos, which should the public believe? Your words or your written acknowledgement of falsehood? Hannity shifted, his posture tightening. I don't accept the premise that my show is responsible for public interpretation. People can verify information themselves. I'm a commentator, not a fact checker. Crockett's expression hardened. A commentator who commands an audience of millions and whose words can move markets, inspire protests, and deepen divides. She paused, letting the weight of that statement linger. When the stakes are that high, ignorance stops being a defense. It becomes complicity. The murmur in the chamber swelled again. Cameras zoomed closer on Hannity's face. The red hue that had started earlier now returned deeper, visible even under the cold fluorescent lights. Congresswoman, he shot back, his voice rising slightly. You're implying intent, malicious intent, behind journalism. That's absurd. People have different opinions, different sources. If everyone followed your definition, half of Washington would be guilty of misinformation. Crockett didn't blink. If half of Washington were knowingly misleading the public, Mr. Hannity, then half of Washington would deserve to be here answering the same questions you are. A few quiet chuckles rippled from the gallery. Hannity forced a smile. You've made your point, Congresswoman. I just hope you apply that same standard to your friends in the media. Oh, I do, she said coolly. The difference is, they don't have internal memos admitting they lied. That drew a soft gasp, the kind that comes when the audience senses blood in the water. Hannity clenched his pen, leaned forward and lowered his tone. Let's not play moral superior here. You and I both know politics is theater. What matters is who tells the story best. And what happens, Crockett replied, voice steady as stone, when the story becomes more powerful than the truth. He hesitated. You think your truth is universal. I think facts are, she said simply. For a moment the room was still, two opposing forces locked in silence, the weight of accountability pressing down on both. Then Crockett resumed, flipping to another page. Let's discuss influence. According to campaign filings, your political commentary increased donations to specific candidates by millions of dollars following your broadcasts. Were you aware of this correlation? Hannity shrugged slightly. Correlation doesn't equal causation. Viewers support whoever they believe represents their values. And who defines those values, Mr. Hannity? You. Or your scripts? He bristled. Scripts, I speak my mind. Indeed, she said, eyes glinting. Which is why your words carry more weight than you pretend. You can't separate responsibility from reach. You've blurred the line between opinion and evidence so deeply that people no longer know the difference. Hannity smirked, but his voice cracked faintly. I think you underestimate the intelligence of my audience. I think you underestimate your influence over them. She countered. The chamber buzzed again. Every exchange between them felt like a legal cross-examination dressed as a debate. Crockett's tone was factual, surgical. Hannity's responses grew defensive. Finally, she reached the last page in her folder. Now, one final receipt before I rest my questions for this round. She held up a printed screenshot, a text exchange between two senior producers. The top line read, Hannity just said it again. Legal told us to stop repeating that claim. The response too late. It's already live. Crockett placed the page flat on the table. Your network's legal team advised you to stop broadcasting false claims. And you continued. Why? Hannity leaned back. His voice dropped an octave. Because truth isn't decided by lawyers, Congresswoman. It's decided by perspective. Crockett's eyes flashed. Perspective doesn't change facts. It only distorts them. The words hit like a gavel. Even the chair didn't interrupt. No one dared. Then she said quietly, Mr. Hannity, I want you to look around this chamber. The reason this hearing exists is because millions of Americans can't tell who to trust anymore. And that confusion, that chaos, didn't come from foreign interference or rogue agencies. It came from trusted voices who traded truth for influence. Hannity swallowed, visibly tense. You're blaming me for America's division. I'm holding you accountable for the parts you played, she said. He tried to deflect, laughing nervously. Well, Congresswoman, you seem to think you're the nation's moral compass. No, she replied. Just someone who refuses to let misinformation hide behind charm and ratings. The chamber erupted into quiet applause before the chair called for order. Hannity's smile vanished. He stared down at the papers in front of him, his own words, his own broadcasts now turned into evidence. Crockett sat back at last, folding her hands. We'll pick this up again, she said. Next, we'll examine how your network handled retractions, or rather, how it didn't. Hannity didn't look up. For the first time, he seemed smaller under the lights. His usual confidence eroded, his showman's grin replaced with a tight-lipped silence. The cameras captured every frame. Crockett poised, composed, and unrelenting. Hannity flushed, rigid and trapped in the contradictions of his own record. It was no longer a debate, it was a reckoning. And the receipts had only just begun to surface. The third session began with a sharp crack of the gavel. The air felt denser now, the kind of tension that comes not from argument, but from anticipation of exposure. Every camera lens in the room locked in on Sean Hannity, who sat with his jaw tight and eyes narrowed. His team whispered furiously behind him, sliding papers, scrawling through phones, perhaps searching for something to neutralize what they all knew was coming next. Across the aisle, Jasmine Crockett adjusted her chair and glanced briefly at the clock. She looked rested, unfazed. Her opening line came like a clean cut. "Mr. Hannity," she said, "in our previous session, we discussed documented instances where your commentary contradicted your network's verified facts. Now, I'd like to shift to how those contradictions were coordinated." The word coordinated dropped like a stone. A collective murmur rippled through the gallery. Hannity tilted his head slightly, a practiced smirk appearing, the on-air confidence slipping back into place. "Coordinated, Congresswoman? You make it sound like there's some conspiracy. We're a newsroom, not a cabal." Crockett smiled faintly. "Then you won't mind if we review a few scheduling memos." She lifted a set of pages, the header visible under the overhead light. "Segment planning, narrative reinforcement strategy." Hannity's expression froze. Crockett continued, her tone calm and unhurried. "This document, produced by your senior editorial director, outlines how specific storylines were to be repeated across multiple programs to maintain viewer engagement and prevent narrative fragmentation." Hannity's mouth opened slightly. "You're misunderstanding that memo. It's standard media practice to ensure consistent messaging." She nodded once. "Consistent messaging or coordinated spin?" He shot back. "Are you accusing me of lying again?" "I'm letting your own paperwork speak," she said. "The memo references your show specifically. It directs, and I quote, Hannity to reiterate election integrity narrative nightly until audience retention stabilizes. That's not coordination for clarity. That's orchestration for persuasion." A low whistle came from somewhere in the gallery. The chair struck the gavel once to silence the reaction. Crockett pressed on. "And this wasn't a one-off. Your internal correspondence shows multiple directives like this. Coordinated phrasing, identical talking points, recycled sound bites. It reads less like journalism and more like choreography." Hannity exhaled, trying to keep his voice level. "So what? Every network crafts a message. You act like it's a crime to agree on words." "Words shape truth," Crockett said. "And when those words mislead millions, agreement becomes manipulation." He scoffed. "Spare me the sermon, Congresswoman. You act as if the people who watch me are puppets." "No," she replied smoothly. "But I do believe they deserve a puppeteer who doesn't cut the strings of truth." The line drew quiet applause before the chair restored order again. Hannity's face tightened, the red hue climbing up his neck once more. His fingers tapped the desk, a faint rhythm of frustration. Crockett opened another folder. "Now let's talk about retractions, or, more accurately, the lack thereof." Hannity leaned back, trying for a laugh. "Oh, here we go. You think every broadcast needs a footnote when it's false?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Here's a list of 37 statements made on your program later proven inaccurate or unsubstantiated. Not one was corrected on air. In fact, several were repeated after debunking." "Debunked by whom?" he demanded. "By your own network's legal team, among others," she replied. "And if you'd like, I can read their names into the record." He swallowed. The bravado was thinning now, like paint cracking under pressure. Crockett flipped through her binder. "Example. You told your viewers that a government agency admitted to tampering with ballots. When pressed, you said the information came from confidential sources. The agency released an official denial within 24 hours. Yet 2 nights later, you repeated the same claim, word for word." Hannity forced a grin. "That's because the agency's denial didn't make sense." Crockett's tone turned colder. "So when the facts don't fit your narrative, you rewrite the facts." He said nothing. "You see, Mr. Hannity," she continued, "this isn't about politics. It's about the chain of influence, how one broadcast can become a rallying cry for outrage, a spark for division, even violence. You can't light fires and then say you're just holding the match." For the first time, Hannity's voice faltered. "You're implying intent again." "That's not fair. Intent matters less than impact," she said. "And your impact is measurable." She pointed to a large screen as a chart appeared, spikes of online searches, social media shares, and protest attendance directly following his broadcasts. The correlation was undeniable. Hannity shook his head. "You can't control what people do with information. You can control what information you give them," Crockett said. The silence afterward was sharp enough to slice air. Then she leaned forward slightly. "You know, Mr. Hannity, my grandmother used to say, you can't claim surprise when the seeds you plant finally bloom. You planted fear. You watered it nightly, And now you want to act shocked that it grew. The chamber was dead silent. Hannity's face was now visibly flushed, the redness climbing up to his temples. He picked up a paper, waved it slightly. This is political theater. You're trying to silence conservative voices. Crockett shook her head slowly. No, sir. Accountability isn't censorship. It's consequence. Her voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. The restraint made it more powerful than shouting ever could. Let's not pretend you're a victim here, she added. You've made millions shaping narratives that eroded public trust in democracy. You stood on a platform of influence, not ignorance. You can't claim you didn't know the weight of your words. Hannity laughed bitterly. You think you're some kind of crusader. You just want a headline. Crockett's response was immediate. If headlines scared me, I wouldn't be sitting here. You're not facing me, Mr. Hannity, you're facing the truth you've been dodging. A pause. Then she set down her papers. You say your job is to ask questions. So let me return the favor. She leaned forward. Why did your show continue airing discredited stories after your legal department advised against them? He hesitated. Because we believed there was still something there? Or because admitting you were wrong would cost you viewers? The room collectively inhaled. Hannity didn't answer. Why? She pressed. Did your program suppress fact checks that contradicted your talking points? I don't write every script, he muttered. But you sign every paycheck of credibility your audience cashes, she replied. He fell silent. Crockett let the quiet stretch long enough for the weight of every unanswered question to fill the space. Then she gathered her notes and looked directly at the committee chair. I have one final set of exhibits for the record, she said. Communications between Mr. Hannity's team and a political PAC that coordinated messaging within 24 hours of his broadcasts. I'll submit them in full for the committee's review. Hannity's eyes widened. That's not public. It is now, she said. A flashbulb popped. Cameras caught every flicker of his reaction. The disbelief, the anger, the flickering awareness that the showman had lost control of the stage. The chair banged the gavel. Order in the chamber. But the damage was done. The words, the evidence, the optics, all irreversible. Crockett sat back, her expression unreadable. We'll reconvene for closing remarks and recommendations, she said. And perhaps then, Mr. Hannity, we'll see whether truth can still find its way through the static. As she rose, Hannity remained seated, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the table in front of him. For the first time, he didn't have a monologue ready. The host who thrived on control now sat in silence, framed by the very lights that once glorified him. The hearing cameras panned out slowly. Crockett walking steadily from the table, Hannity still at his seat, his face red, his silence louder than any rebuttal. And as the gavel struck again, the chamber knew the final act was about to begin. The chamber had grown quieter than ever before. Even the murmurs from the press gallery seemed to have been swallowed by the weight of what had already transpired. The gavel came down with a sharp echo, signaling the beginning of the final segment. All eyes were on Jasmine Crockett and Sean Hannity, who now sat rigid, his posture betraying the tension that had only built across the prior sessions. Crockett adjusted her glasses, straightened her notes, and leaned forward slightly. Her voice was calm, precise, carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades mastering not only law but the art of speaking truth to power. Mr. Hannity, she began, we have reviewed your broadcasts, your internal communications, and the evidence of your coordinated messaging. We have documented the lack of corrections, the internal memos advising against continued broadcasts of false information, and the demonstrable influence of your programming on public perception. Hannity opened his mouth to interject, but she held up a hand, polite but unmistakable in its firmness. Let me finish. She paused, letting the silence linger. Every camera, every observer, every member of the committee waited for the next words. This hearing is not about partisanship, it is not about political theater. It is about accountability. You have wielded your influence over millions, shaping narratives in ways that have undermined public trust. And now you sit here, confronted by the evidence of your own making. Hannity's hand twitched toward the folder in front of him. He cleared his throat. Congresswoman, you continue to present selective evidence. This is an attack on freedom of speech. Freedom of speech, Crockett interrupted, voice steady and deliberate, does not grant immunity from responsibility. You are not being punished for your opinions. You are being held accountable for your decisions. for the willful dissemination of falsehoods despite knowing their consequences. A ripple of reactions moved through the room. Some members of the committee nodded subtly, while others scribbled notes, clearly recognizing the gravity of her statements. She continued, pulling up another exhibit. A spreadsheet detailing social media metrics directly correlated to specific segments aired on Hannity's program. This data demonstrates spikes in misinformation circulation, coordinated campaigns targeting election officials, and public unrest following segments you personally hosted. The correlation is undeniable. Hannity exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. The red hue that had crept up his neck earlier now dominated his complexion, a visible signal of both frustration and disbelief. He attempted to speak, but Crockett's gaze held him in place. "Mr. Hannity," she said, voice lowering slightly but cutting through the tension, "you have built a career on shaping narratives, but tonight, the narrative is being shaped by the facts, by your own words, your own memos, and your own broadcasts. You may attempt to dismiss this as political theater, but the consequences are real. Lives were impacted. Institutions were challenged. Truth was obscured." She leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "Do you understand that what you broadcast is not just entertainment, it is influence? And influence carries responsibility." Hannity's lips pressed together tightly. "Congresswoman, no," she said firmly, raising a hand again. "You will have your turn. But first, let us acknowledge the record. The record reflects that your commentary repeatedly contradicted verified facts, that you continued broadcasting claims after legal advisories, and that your audience was intentionally directed to interpret these claims in a particular way. That is not conjecture. That is documentation." The room went still. Every pen stopped moving, every camera lens focused, every breath seemed measured. Hannity's expression flickered, from defensiveness to incredulity to a silent acknowledgement of the corner he had been backed into. Crockett leaned back slightly, letting her words settle. Then she allowed a small, almost imperceptible pause before delivering what would become the defining moment of the hearing. "Tonight, the truth has been presented clearly, meticulously, and unflinchingly. And yet, Mr. Hannity, you sit here, your face red not from anger alone, but from the undeniable weight of accountability. Your platform is immense. Your influence is formidable. But neither can shield you from the consequences of knowingly misleading millions." The red in Hannity's face deepened. His hands gripped the table as though it were the last anchor in a storm he could not control. Every time a claim was repeated after being disproven, every time a legal advisory was ignored, every time your broadcasts amplified fear and division, the consequences were not hypothetical, they were real. Communities were affected. Officials were harassed. Public trust was eroded, and you were at the center of it all. Hannity's mouth opened, then closed. His usual rapid-fire defense, the monologues he delivered effortlessly on air, were gone. Silence had replaced performance. Crockett's tone softened ever so slightly, not out of concession, but to underscore the weight of the moment. "This is not about retribution. It is about responsibility, and it is about demonstrating to the American people, those who watched, those who listened, those who questioned, that accountability is not selective nor partisan. Accountability is universal." She leaned forward one final time. "Mr. Hannity, you have a choice. You can acknowledge the record, admit the documented errors, and commit to transparency and correction, or you can continue to deny the reality of the evidence before you. But understand, this denial will not erase the record, it will not erase the impact, and it will not erase the fact that, in this chamber tonight, truth has been presented in full, and you, sir, have faced it unshielded, exposed, and unguarded." The silence was total. Even the committee members, seasoned in politics and debate, seemed captivated. Hannity's hands had stopped tapping. His chest rose and fell rapidly, but no words emerged. The flush of his face had transformed from a burst of emotion into a portrait of confrontation. The face of a man forced to meet the consequences of his own actions. Crockett gathered her papers slowly, deliberately, and stood. "This concludes my examination. The committee will deliberate and consider the implications of the evidence presented. And while the gavel will fall, the record will remain public, complete, and unaltered." She straightened, looked once more at Hannity, and offered a final remark. "Mr. Hannity, influence is a privilege, not a shield. And tonight we have seen the difference." The gavel struck, loud, sharp, final. Cameras panned across the chamber. Hannity remained seated, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the table. Every flash, every lens, captured the exact moment a man renowned for commanding the narrative found himself stripped of control. His words, his broadcasts, his carefully crafted persona, all exposed, laid bare under the unyielding light of accountability. Crockett turned and walked out steadily, measured and unshaken. The echo of her steps resonated through the hall, a sound louder than any applause. The gallery, the staff, the committee, all knew they had witnessed more than a hearing. They had witnessed a reckoning. Hannity finally rose, attempted to adjust his tie to compose himself, but the performance felt hollow, forced. The audience could see the strain, the blush lingering across his face, the subtle tremor of frustration and disbelief. For a man who had faced countless debates, interviews, and public challenges, this confrontation had been different. It was no longer a battle of rhetoric, it was a collision with irrefutable reality. And as the chamber emptied, the flashes of cameras continued to capture the indelible image: a powerful congresswoman standing firm, and a man who had wielded influence facing the undeniable force of accountability. A lesson in truth that would not soon be forgotten. The hearing concluded. The public record stood, and Sean Hannity's face, still tinged red, told a story louder than any rebuttal could: the story of influence confronted, truth asserted, and a reckoning delivered in full.